It is October 24th, 2024, and Blinken is on what seems like his 1 millionth trip to the Middle East, where he's once again sitting down face to face with Netanyahu and trying to convince him that they should agree to a ceasefire in Gaza and in Lebanon. Or at least that's what the mainstream media here in the US is telling me. And can I just say that if you genuinely believe that Blinken is going to accomplish anything on any one of these trips, then I have a tropical island to sell you in the middle of nowhere, West Texas. Because let's be honest here, this is not how these meetings go, right? Blinken goes in, he talks to Netanyahu, and then they both come out with different versions of it. You've got the US State Department saying that Blinken really pushed for a ceasefire this time, that he told Netanyahu that Israel should take advantage of the fact that they killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar in Gaza last week, and that they should use that to really push for a truce of some kind. And then you have Netanyahu's office coming out with their version, in which they talk about how the two officials talked about uniting against Iran. Because we have to remember, Israel is still planning to attack Iran. And not only is the US doing absolutely nothing to stop that, they're also doing absolutely nothing for the civilians in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, the list goes on, as do the massacres that Israel is carrying out. Now, we got into all of the latest coming out of the Middle East with a special guest earlier, but before we get into that, I have a quick question for those of you watching. I'm curious to know, do you prefer the current format where I have a quick 1 to 2 minute intro talking about the interview and then we get into it and then that's it for the video? Or would you prefer a little bit more in depth, possibly adding in some other major news topics that are happening right now, and then going into the interview? So a little bit more of, I guess I would say, a well-rounded show, maybe a little bit of a longer video, taking it up to about 30 minutes. Typically, the interviews that I do right now are anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, just depending on how things go. I'm curious, do you prefer the shorter intro, right? Do you see the title, you see the topic that the video on, you want to get right into it, which I know if you're preferring that, you're probably like, why is she still talking? But do you prefer to get right into the video with a short intro, or would you prefer more of a longer intro, more conversation about kind of what else is going on in the world today? Before we get into that conversation, let me know in the comments section. And without further ado, let's get into the interview. Joining me now to discuss is Dimitri Lascaris, a Canadian journalist, activist, lawyer, and host of Reason to Resist. Dimitri, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Pleasure to speak to you again, Rachel. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show again. And I want to get your take on a few different things. I know that this week, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken went to Israel. He met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And the media here in the West is framing this as if Blinken went in and he really tried to tell Netanyahu that it's time for a ceasefire in Gaza and also in Lebanon. But if you look at the statement from Netanyahu's office, it's all about saying that they talked about uniting against Iran. So tell us a bit of a different story. How do you view these talks and what likely actually happened?
You can't reconcile the U.S. government's rhetoric, in my opinion, with the simple and undeniable fact that it has enabled Israel's attacks on the Palestinian people, the Lebanese resistance groups, and Yemen, amongst others in the region, including Syria, at every step of the way. There has never been a moment when the United States has taken the simple option of depriving Israel, or even explicitly and unequivocally threatening to deprive Israel of the munitions it needs to carry out these attacks. I think that tells us all we need to know about the United States' objectives in this regard. I also think, tangentially, it's quite telling that Dick Cheney and I believe John Bolton, two of the ultimate neocons in the United States, have endorsed Kamala Harris. Why did they do that? Because they want a war on Iran. It's not because they're Democrats. It's not because they are concerned that Trump threatens the democracy, which Cheney and Bush themselves hijacked in 2000 when they stole the election. No, it's because they have a certain neoconservative objective on the world. And the Democrats have now become the party of war to an even greater degree, arguably, than the establishment wing of the Republican Party. So all of this is kabuki theater, in my view, Rachel. It's all designed to suggest to the American people as Election Day approaches that the Democrats actually care about peace, that they actually value Palestinian lives and the other lives of the civilians in the region. The reality, however, is simply not reconcilable with the rhetoric.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating to watch as the Biden administration has really kind of played this game for the last year. As you're noting there, they act like, oh, yeah, we want to see a ceasefire or we want to see a quote unquote humanitarian pause. They send Blinken to the Middle East. I mean, it seems like every month, every few weeks, he's going over there for some kind of tour, some kind of meeting with Israeli officials, and then nothing comes out of it. When at the same time, the US has the power here, right? If they wanted to cut off military aid, if they wanted to cut off political and public support for Israel, they have the power to do it. And yet instead they send Blinken, and according to the State Department, they say that Blinken really pressed Netanyahu on the fact that Israel needs to capitalize on the killing last week of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and to use that to end the war with Hamas in Gaza. But as we know, Netanyahu has made it clear he has no intention of doing that. So how do you see the current situation as, yes, Israel is carrying out, these various targeted assassinations of leaders within Hamas and Hezbollah, but that hasn't actually changed things on the ground when it comes to the military aspect?
Ultimately, I believe that this war is going to result, the likelihood, not a certainty, but the likelihood is it will result in Israel's destruction. And what I mean by Israel's destruction, I don't mean that the Israeli population is going to be wiped out. I mean that Israel, as it has been constructed and known to us from the time of its creation, which is essentially an apartheid state, a land that dispossesses and delegitimizes and disenfranchises the indigenous Palestinian population in preference to a largely immigrant population of European origin mostly, that model is going to collapse. It simply cannot be sustained. And how this happens, I think the most likely scenario is that the war will escalate. More and more Israeli Jews will come to understand that the state cannot protect them from the adversaries which it has created by tormenting and abusing the Palestinian population, the other Arab peoples of the region. And they're going to leave. Slowly but surely, they will leave. They will seek security in other countries where they have real security available to them. They won't in Israel, not as long as Israel continues to behave this way. And we're seeing this in real time every day. We saw that the resistance groups in Lebanon can strike the prime minister's bedroom. They launched a drone at Netanyahu's swank villa in the coastal town of Caesarea, and they hit the bedroom of the prime minister. The Israeli government has confirmed this. We saw that Iran can strike the Nevatim air base with dozens of apparently hypersonic missiles. This is arguably the most heavily defended military asset that Israel has. We have seen that Hezbollah is able to strike military targets at will, even after all of the losses it has sustained at the leadership level. Both the political and military leadership of Hezbollah have been devastated. And yet we're seeing strikes now reaching into Tel Aviv regularly. There are drones circling over Tel Aviv that the Israeli military seems incapable of bringing down. We're seeing soldiers entering into North Lebanon ostensibly for the purpose of removing the Islamic resistance from the area south of the Litani River, and they're suffering very heavy casualties. Not even the Israeli military is able to conceal this. So gradually, but inexorably, it is becoming quite clear to the Israeli population that its military cannot defend it from the retaliatory attacks, because that's what they are. They're retaliatory in nature, of the indigenous peoples in the region. I don't think that this apartheid model can survive in such circumstances. And I think if people in the United States who are Zionist really actually were thinking rationally and in a way that was designed to preserve the security of Israel, they would demand that the Netanyahu government stop its aggressions.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I'm glad you bring up the fact that, look, Israel is making its own enemies in the region, and not just by its existence, although that arguably is case enough, but it's continuing on with these bombings. I mean, the massacres, that the stories that are coming out of Gaza right now alone are just horrific. You add in Lebanon, you add in everything that Israel is actively doing to the region right now. And when it comes to that strategy, I mean, I look at northern Gaza in particular. I know that, we know obviously Israel is committing genocide targeting all Palestinians, but right now in the northern half of Gaza, they've cut off food, water, and medicine. And the terror that they are unleashing on the civilians there is just horrific in this attempt to, I guess, to empty the region of Palestinians. I mean, how do you see their goal in northern Gaza? I know that a lot of this wrath is because they've been telling people to leave for the last year now. Many people haven't. This is their land. They know that they don't have anything better to go to in the southern half of Gaza, and it's their right to decide to stay there if they want to. But how do you view the current situation?
This is a project of extermination. A UN panel decreed as such just a few days ago when it focused upon the systematic destruction of the healthcare system in Gaza. They are clearly trying to either kill all the Palestinians in the Strip or create such miserable and unsustainable conditions that the survivors are forced to leave and go somewhere. I don't think they particularly care where. They just want them out of the territory they regard as Greater Israel, which is not limited, by the way, to the boundaries of historic Palestine. This also would include the Golan Heights. It would include South Lebanon, potentially parts of Jordan. But at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. It's so obvious, Rachel, that this is a project of extermination that those who even raise doubts about the ultimate aim of Israel, I think, have lost all credibility. They are shunting the people, the civilian population of Gaza around from one allegedly safe point to another. And then they bomb them once they go into an area that has been decreed safe by the Israeli military. They are not providing the basic necessities of life to sustain the civilian population. They are burning children alive. They are obliterating children, tearing their limbs apart. There have been medical officials who've gone to Gaza from the United States and returned and told that they have seen child after child shot in the head by Israeli military, either in circumstances where the child was playing outside, and in some cases, even when they were playing within their home. So they're obviously trying to exterminate the civilian population of Gaza. What more evidence do we need? And they're even boasting about it by posting evidence of their war crimes on social media. So that's what this is about. It's as simple as that. And ultimately, Israel will be adjudged, in my opinion, as a committer of genocide. When this trial working its way through the ICJ, which decreed in January, before much of the current horror was committed, that it was plausible Israel is committing genocide, ultimately it will be adjudged both by competent tribunals and by history to be a committer of genocide with our full-blown Western support.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that will be the case, and it's just it's shocking to think. And I know a lot of times we look back at history and we think, oh well, if that genocide or that Holocaust had been carried out, surely more people would be speaking up. And it's like we look around right now, and no, that's not necessarily the case. It can be right in front of your face. You can see the images and the videos. You can see the rhetoric coming from Israeli officials. I mean, they have displayed genocidal intent all over the place, and yet we still have the West in a position where it thinks it's on the right side of history by continuing to support this genocide, by continuing to really enable it to make it possible. And, speaking about Israel's crimes kind of extending into the region, I did want to bring up what they're doing in Lebanon right now. They're continuing to bomb the country to kill civilians there. And they recently started targeting the historic Lebanese port city of Tyre, now forcing tens of thousands of residents to flee. And you noted on X that back in August, you actually visited this city and that you saw zero evidence of military activity or assets there. So why do you think that Israel is targeting this area? And is this actually really about targeting Lebanese heritage and kind of going back to those eventual plans for Greater Israel?
I believe it is. This is this city of Tyre, the historic section of Tyre, which, as you mentioned, I visited more than once actually in the past year, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And if you were to stroll through this area before it was devastated by the current bombardment, it would have appeared to you as, the old quarter of similar to Jerusalem or any of the other historic cities in the region. Even some of the historic towns, although a different culture, a different era, that you will find across much of Europe. To suggest that there was any legitimate reason for this to be bombed is preposterous to anybody who's actually been there and knows the center of Tyre. And this is being done elsewhere as well. The Nabatea, also a city in South Lebanon that has a great deal of historical significance. They basically have carpet bombed the ancient market of Nabatea within the past few days. And on top of all of that, they're destroying the medical system of Lebanon now. Why would anybody be surprised by this after they were allowed to destroy Gaza's healthcare system with complete impunity? They're attacking hospitals using the same preposterous reasons. There's a command bunker underneath the hospital. They claim that one hospital has $500 million in cash and gold belonging to Hezbollah stored underneath it. The theory of all of this, of course, is that the patients and medical staff are being used by Israel's opponents as human shields. Now, if you just stop and you think about it, Rachel, you would only be doing that, assuming you're capable of such a monstrosity, if you believe that the presence of those individuals, those human shields, would actually protect you from Israel. But as we've seen, they provide zero protection whatsoever. Israel doesn't care whether it's a hospital or some other kind of civilian facility, a school, a church, a mosque. It'll just blow it to bits no matter what. So no sane person would think that by putting a command bunker in or under a hospital, you would be protecting yourself from the ravages of the Israeli military. None of it makes any sense, and it's never backed up by any credible evidence. This is about now, this extermination project is being extended into parts of Lebanon that Israel covets. This is part of the Greater Israel Project, with which the most extreme members in the Netanyahu cabinet don't even conceal. They openly say that this is their ultimate objective.
Yeah, and it's such a reminder to me. And I know that, when it comes to when you look at the Middle East, right, you have the resistance that has supported Palestine. And then you have the other countries around who have kind of tried to just go about this lightly, right? They're still allowing trade with Israel. They're not cutting off ties altogether. They're trying to kind of balance the US and Israel and everything that's going on with this ongoing genocide. And yet, when you're talking about Greater Israel, you're talking about this map expanding and kind of taking territory from a number of countries around where Israel currently is right now. Do you think that the region is taking this seriously enough and realizing whatsoever that, hey, if Israel gets away with taking over all of the Gaza Strip and eventually all of the West Bank, guess what? The expansion does not stop there.
It depends on what you mean by the region. If by the region you mean the Western-backed and sustained autocrats like the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia or the British monarch or the Egyptian dictator, I think they're concerned about this, but at the end of the day, they'll do as Washington tells them to do. And their primary objective is their own power and their own enrichment. It always has been. But if you're talking about the peoples of the region, ordinary human beings living in close proximity to Israel, living in areas that are encompassed by the Greater Israel Project, I think they are very, very concerned, and they are becoming increasingly hostile towards Israel as a result. And we're seeing some indications of this. For example, there were armed men who infiltrated across from Jordan into Israel and wounded a number of soldiers on the Israeli military. There was an attack recently at the Allenby Bridge in which 3 border guards were killed by a Jordanian who was then treated. He was himself slain after he killed the 3 border guards, but he was treated as a hero by the people living in the part of Jordan from which he comes. We're seeing, interestingly, I just saw a report in the Times of Israel today that both Iran and Saudi Arabia are engaged in naval exercises in the region. This would have been unthinkable not long ago, not because the Saudi autocracy is pro-Palestinian, I don't think it is, but because of the pressure from the people within its own country. There was a poll which showed that over 90% of the Saudi population wanted the government to sever all ties with Israel. So the people in the region are acutely aware of the risk of Israeli expansion, but more so they're aware acutely of the risk to their own safety and security and that of their children. And ultimately, this is going to imperil the very survival of regimes like those in Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt, which ultimately do the bidding of Washington.
Yeah, it's no surprise to see that while you have the governments at the top, right, those officials that are they try to act like, oh, we want to see a ceasefire. They'll show out some lip service about the Palestinians, and it's like, no, at the end of the day, you're just trying to make sure that there's not a massive uprising in your country with the public standing up because they do realize what's actually going on here. Now, kind of expanding from beyond just the Middle East, I know that this week we also have the BRICS summit taking place over in Russia. You have leaders there from dozens of countries coming together. The West losing its mind a little bit because they have tried incredibly hard to isolate Russia. They're seeing that that is not working. But at this summit, you are seeing warnings about the Middle East that are also coming from Russian President Putin himself, noting that, hey, we need to be concerned about where tensions are headed there. How do you view the significance of the BRICS summit and kind of what it means for the potential of an actual challenge to the West, which includes that Western dominance in an area like the Middle East?
Well, I think it's quite clear that the BRICS member states are determined to liberate themselves from the shackles of the US dominated global financial system. They want to create an alternative payment system. They want to trade in their own currencies, or perhaps one day a common currency belonging to the BRICS and controlled by the BRICS. They're creating development banks and financial institutions. They have a BRICS Pay card now, which is meant as an alternative to Western bank issued credit cards and debit cards. So this is really the game changer. If the BRICS states are able to create some sort of system that liberates their societies from dependence upon the US global reserve currency, the United States is in a world of pain because it cannot fund its military industrial complex. It cannot sustain its soaring debt levels unless the dollar remains the US global reserve currency. The global reserve currency. But quite apart from all of that, Rachel, there is the military component to this, and that is the states are cooperating militarily, increasingly so. We see Iran, China, and Russia, all of whom say their relationships with the others are of strategic importance, trading in military technologies, engaged in military exercises together, coordinating their activities, and increasingly talking about coming to each other's defense in the case of an attack. This is ultimately going to result in a world in which the US can no longer play a dominant role. And I think we actually have arrived there. And every day this becomes increasingly clear, particularly in Ukraine, where NATO has effectively been defeated by the Russian Federation, despite the fact that the collective military budget of NATO is probably in the range of 10 times the Russian military budget. It's a stunning, epic debacle that's unfolded there. And that, more than anything else, to my mind, signifies the end of Western dominance.
Yeah, that's the thing that the US has not learned from all of the empires of the past, right? They think that they can do it better, that they can continue to go around the world to invade countries and overthrow governments, and in this case carry out an all-out genocide against the Palestinians. And it's like, while the end isn't as near as it may need to be in some cases, it cannot go on like this forever. Certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Dimitri Lascaris, a Canadian journalist, activist, lawyer, and host of Reason to Resist. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
It's a pleasure, Rachel. Thank you very much.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you can check out weekly episodes of my new series, Sanction, which is exclusively for paid subscribers. You can also check out Sanction over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can join the community there. And as always, thank y'all so much for all of your support. I'll see you next time.